Well, hopefully that gave everyone enough time to join the webinar. Just want to welcome everyone today. You are here to listen to a little bit of additional information about the MEDC's CDBG Public Gathering Space Initiative. So really happy to have you. I am Paula Holtz. I am with the Regional Prosperity Team at the MEDC, and I have been a part of a great group of people working behind the scenes at the MEDC to bring this program back. As you probably recall, last year was our inaugural year to have this competitive funding round. We are now on our second annual funding round. Also with me today, and you will be hearing from them later, Greg West, as well as Amy Schlesler-Schmidt, both from the CDBG team at the MEDC, and we will be here to answer all of your questions. So, but first wanted to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. As you do have questions, will you please submit those to the Q&A portion of this webinar? We're asking you to put them in the Q&A section just because it helps us to compile all of those. What we will be doing is we will compile all of those questions as well as the answers, and that will be sent out after after the webinar to all of the registrants so you can see the follow-up. Also for today's webinar, we will be recording, so just wanted to make you aware of that. And that will also be something that we will be sending out to you post-webinar. So you'll be able to relive this great moment we're having together at any future moment. So Nathan, would you mind heading to the first slide? So just a bit of an overview. This is really what we'll cover today. We have a brief PowerPoint, but really I think the crux of what we would like to spend our time on today are really your questions and answering those questions. A few of you did submit questions ahead of time when you registered, so we'll cover those first. But really just want to talk a little bit about the program, any changes from last year, what the eligibility requirements are, how the awards will be structured, what eligible activities we will be considering, and then scoring and timeline, and then get to all of those questions. Next slide, please. So just to recap, many of you probably remember this, but really the goal of this program is to increase the usability, accessibility, and seasonality of public spaces. They can be new or existing spaces within your communities, and it is to increase the usability of spaces on publicly owned property. So it talks a little bit about project activities and just the project types, which could be amphitheaters, could be parks, streetscapes, playgrounds, farmers markets, pretty wide open in terms of eligibility, but those are just some examples of projects we've seen applied for. Next slide, please. So in order to be an applicant, community needs to be a non-entitlement unit of general local government, or an UGLUG as we like to say, with a population of less than 50,000. And has to be on the MEDC's low and moderate income community customers list. If you are not sure whether or not your community is on that list, we will be populating that within our chat, so you can quickly click on that link and see if your community is on that list. And you do need to be on that list in order to be eligible for this round of funding. I had mentioned, but definitely want to reiterate, the project has to be located on municipally owned property. And the property does need to be owned by the UGLUG at the time of application. We did get a couple of questions last year about whether or not the property could be, thank you, Maggie, whether or not it could be under contract to be owned by the municipality, or whether or not there could be a long-term easement. And really both of those answers are no, it needs to be UGLUG owned at the time of application. The minimum requirement for match is 10%, and it's 10% of the total project costs. Sometimes people ask whether or not it's 10% of the CDBG request, or whether or not it's 10% of the total project costs, and it is total project costs, and that is the minimum. Next slide, please. Really the point I want to make on this slide is the increase in the award amounts. And so the requested amount from the CDBG team would be between 750,000 to 2 million. And so that is a change from last year, and really that change has been made to reflect the updates in the CDBG funding guide, that was adopted by our Michigan Strategic Fund Board last fall. So your ask needs to be between 750 and 2 million. So hopefully you've been cultivating some of those larger projects within your community. Next slide, please. Wanted to talk just briefly about eligible activities. I think the takeaway here on this slide is really the word permanent. And so when you are looking at what activities would be eligible for this funding, it needs to be permanent. So permanent infrastructure, could be playground equipment, could be public restrooms, drinking fountains, all of those items. We will fund permanent ambiance amenities, we are calling them. But again, with a focus on the permanent, so it could be outdoor speaker systems, heating systems, affixed tables, benches, public art. I think, again, if I were looking to apply for this funding, I would be thinking of something that was affixed, you know, thinking through what these lovely public spaces are like. And you think of those amenities, I think of white lights and I think of movable tables and chairs. Those are not items that we are able to fund through this program. So just wanted to put that out there. Certainly universal accessibility design elements are eligible and encouraged. Indeed, they will be scored upon. And then just any other permanent infrastructure or ambiance amenities deemed eligible by HUD. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about scoring. This is very similar to how we scored applications last year. There are a couple of notable differences though. One is project location that we did not score on last year. A project located within a downtown district or a high impact corridor or gateway will be eligible to receive 20 additional points in scoring. A project that is located within a 5-minute walk of a downtown district will be eligible for an additional 10 points of scoring. So that is something that is new this year. Also new this year is green infrastructure. So within the application instructions, there is a template that we would ask for you to, it's not required, but there is a template that you can use. It's attachment O, and a licensed engineer would fill that out on behalf of a community. And that just really certifies that the project maintains a certain site runoff volume and adheres to green infrastructure design elements. The other couple of items that are worth mentioning certainly fit with community vision and strategy. You know, we want to be sure that this is a planned for, well thought out project. So we ask for excerpts from your city's master plan or other locally adopted plan, fit with initiative priorities, certainly looking for those universal design elements to make it accessible to all residents, as well as demonstrating how a project application increases the seasonality of an existing or new public space. And happy to talk through any of those in particular. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about timelines. So we were able to announce this initiative in January. The application window just opened earlier this week. Applications are due April 28th at 5 p.m. And so be thinking of that as you are working toward an application. We will send out a quick reminder, maybe about a week before, just to nudge you along. And what our hope would be to bring recommended grant awards to the Michigan Strategic Fund Board in September of this year. And so this timeline follows that goal of doing that. Next slide, please. Questions today can certainly be populated in the Q&A, and we'll go over some of those. But in the future, if you have questions, we would encourage you to send them to publicgatheringspaces@michigan.org. And the way we will do that will be similar to what we had done last year, and that you will send your question in. We will acknowledge receipt of the question, and then we will be compiling a frequently asked questions page that then we will publish every week with everyone's questions and the corresponding answers to those questions. And really that's being done in an effort to make sure everyone is seeing the exact same information. So that is sort of how it will work. Hey, Amy, I wondered if you could get us started on the questions just by covering, we had a couple that were submitted prior to the start of the webinar.
Absolutely, Paula, I am happy.
Thank you.
Yep. So the first question that we saw as part of registration was, is there a specific time frame for when to publish the public hearing notice? such as no earlier or no later than.
Yeah, and I'll take a stab at this, and then Greg, if you have anything additional to add.
Sure.
Certainly, if you want to access the grant administration manual, that provides some additional context, but the notice does need to be published a minimum of 5 calendar days. I do know that, but Greg, do we have any sort of like earlier or later than sort of requirements? Or is it really, adhering to local ordinances in that instance?
Sure. In the, the published notice needs to be out there 5 days before that public hearing, as you said. Both that and the authorizing resolution those steps need to be completed as a part of the complete submission materials. So those are things, and again, I think this is outlined in the application instructions. But those steps are kind of outlined there. Again, as you said, Paula, there is some additional information online related to that, but the information that needs to be in that notice, and I believe sample resolution language, are both included in the application instructions.
Thank you for that, Greg. And I did just in the chat include a link to that grant administration manual, which should have some additional information in case that's helpful. All right, Amy, do we have another question that was submitted ahead of time?
So another question is asking how the application is going to be scored.
Great question. So I did talk a little bit about this, and maybe it'll be helpful if I include the attachment in the chat just so everyone can see it. We have 150 points total. 10 points will be awarded to communities who do not have an existing CDBG grant or LOI. One thing I did want to mention, which I did not mention earlier, is if you are a 2022 grantee of the Public Gathering Space Initiative, you will be ineligible for the 2023 round. However, if you have another open CDBG grant, that is fine. You can still apply. You just won't get those additional 10 points. I see that Amy has included the Appendix D, which outlines the scoring criteria. Thank you for that, Amy. We do have up to 10 points for the percentage of low to moderate income residents within your community. And then likewise, I wonder, let's see, can I pull that up and share my screen, or is that going to mess everything up? Let me just talk through a few more of those.
You can share now if you'd like.
Can I? Okay.
Yep.
That might just be helpful.
So big green arrow at the bottom of your window.
Thank you. All right. Maybe. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So I did mention recent grant awards. There's the percentage you can get up to 10 points based on the percentage of low to moderate income residents within your community. Fit with community vision is 20 points. Fit with the initiative priorities is up to 60 points. And again, like seasonality, accessibility are the two that really stand out to me there. Community benefit, we definitely want to make sure that a project complies with the HUD target of community-wide benefit, 10 points. Project location, I did talk about that, green infrastructure, and then partnership and resource leveraging is up to 10 points. And that is really, I should say, just 10 points if you are bringing additional resources to the table. Hopefully that's helpful, but take a look at that further. Amy, do we have other questions?
We do. And just so other participants know, I think I was able to just upload the scoring document again to everyone. So please just let me know in the comments if you weren't able to view those. The next question is, does this have to be used in a downtown, or could it be used in a park setting?
Thanks, Amy. And that answer is no. It is eligible throughout your community. It just has the opportunity to gain additional points based on location in or adjacent to a downtown, as I mentioned before.
Okay. The next question is, can the grant be used for multiple sites to get to the $750,000 minimum threshold?
Yeah, we had this question asked last year, and certainly there is nothing that would prevent the inclusion of 2 sites within one application. They just both need to be UGLUG owned, and they need to be tied together as part of a larger strategy to provide public gathering spaces for the residents within the UGLUG. So nothing prohibits that.
Great. The next question we received as part of registration was, can this be layered with the Spark grant?
Greg, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Any additional funding or outside funding has to be secured and available at the time of application. So application financing that, if an application identifies that the community has applied for a grant or other sources, we will not consider that as a part of this round. So as long as the other grant has been received and isn't currently, in the scoring process or under consideration, we would be able to consider other sources as it relates, to the financial stack for this particular project.
Thanks, Greg. And I think, just to emphasize, the funding sources need to be approved and available at the time of application. And then the 10% match, Greg, still has to be cash match from the UGLUG, correct?
Correct. Yep. There is a minimum of that 10% cash match.
Thank you for that.
The next question is, what is the minimum and maximum grant amount?
Yeah, I think this is something that's probably been answered. The minimum grant amount is $750,000 and the maximum amount is $2 million.
Okay, next question. Is there a preference for shovel-ready projects?
Yeah, this seemed to, Greg, I felt like you had the best answer to this last year. I think there's a little bit of a dance there where it has to be engineered or designed sufficiently enough in order to obtain reasonable cost estimates. But certainly we wouldn't expect it to be fully engineered or designed. Is that sort of what you would say to that question, Greg?
Yeah, I think to the extent that we want a site to be ready, we understand that these projects have probably been, are identified in local plans, but, funding may not be set aside for them. So what we're trying to do, as you said, Paula, is identify that we can get a good estimate on what the cost of the project is. So to that extent, we expect that, engineering to be completed in order to provide an accurate description of the project and to provide accurate project estimates, but we do fall short of identifying that the project has to, have a full set of plans and specs available, because we do not want communities as a part of the application process spending, large amounts of sums on, in order to apply for a grant that they may or may not be selected for.
Yeah, fair enough, Greg. I appreciate that context. Thank you.
And then I feel like we might have addressed some of this question a little bit earlier on, but the last question that was submitted as part of registration is, will there be guidance on what type of public hearing or public meeting will be required?
Paul, I can jump in on that. So for the public hearing, that would be similar to any of our grant projects, that is by the governing body, so city council, county board, etc. So it would need to go before that body as any other public meeting. You would open the project for public comment, and then you would pass the authorizing resolution that essentially identifies that the community is going to apply for the project, the amount of funds that it is seeking and is committing, where the committed funds are coming from, who on behalf of the community is able to sign the application. And then the resolution also identifies who eventually on behalf of the community is authorized to enter into the grant agreement. So to execute that agreement and then to request payments or, disbursements related to the activities once the project is underway.
That's helpful. And Greg, we also do have templates within
Correct.
the application instructions for all of those public participation documents that I think will be really helpful as people are putting their applications together.
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out, Paula, is as you're going through this, you still can submit. Paula provided that public gathering spaces at michigan.org. That email address that you're able to send in additional questions, and we will answer those questions and then put those responses back up on the website. So if you don't ask the questions today, you get a chance to look at the instructions, the applications, some of the other materials. You do have the ability to follow up and ask those questions. However, because it is a scored and live round now for us, we need to make sure all of the information is equitably distributed. So that's why we ask from this point forward that you formally submit the questions, and then we'll reply in a public manner.
And I feel like I'm watching several screens and it's confusing even me. So I know, like Ben said, he was seeing a response I tried to put into one of the Q&A questions, and then we've got the chat going, but I think we'll try to meld this all together and hopefully get to all of the questions. But certainly, if not, these will all be compiled into the frequently asked questions. So I think, Amy, that may have been all of those that were submitted previous to the start of the webinar, but can you start leafing through some of those that have been posted since we've been started?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So the first question since we've been started, and I'm going to start with the Q&As and then maybe shift into, I think we had a couple in the chat as well.
Great.
The first question is, really an example. So it says we have a water feature that is going to be donated as part of this project. It's coming from a private entity. Does Davis-Bacon apply to this portion of the project? And can this part of the project be a separate feature of the overall project? And that was submitted by Lenny. So Lenny, if I'm going to let them try to answer it, and if I missed anything, we'll certainly try to clarify.
I think the short answer, Lenny, is yes. But Greg, you go ahead if you want to take like the first part, and then there might be a second part to that.
Sure. As it relates to, Davis-Bacon applying, so the way that HUD looks at a project is essentially that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So if the water feature is going to be a part of a project, and then you're considering it a part of the project, then it would be a part of the budget, it would be a part of the project description, and then the compliance would apply to all aspects of the project. So if this water feature is going to be identified as a part of the project, then the installation of the feature or any, construction, etc., that would be related to that would be prevailing wage. So Davis-Bacon would apply to that. And, and again, in regards to being able to separate the feature from the overall project, you as the applicant are able to identify all of the project details. So, if you're able to decide whether that water feature is a part of this gathering space project, or maybe a part of a future project or something that you want to do in the meantime. However, if the work is being completed on the same space at the same time, for HUD's purposes, I believe they would consider that part of the same project. And if we didn't include it, I think they would identify that, we probably didn't in order to avoid compliance, which they would have a problem with.
So proceed with caution, right?
Right.
In how you define the project.
Yeah. If it's something that's going to be completed at the same time and ultimately truly is a part of the project, then you should include all of those activities up front.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. And by all means, if that didn't get at your question, or if you have a follow-up, you can feel free to, lob it out there again, or send something, if it needs to really drill down specifics to a site, you can send it to that email and we'll try to get the answer for you.
So the next question is, would the activities need to be regulated to a singular municipally owned property, or could it be spread across a multitude of properties within the municipality? So for example, public restrooms located throughout the city.
Yeah, I think that there's nothing that precludes a municipality from submitting more than one site. I think the challenge there is just trying to tie them together as part of a larger strategy for public gathering spaces. But there's nothing that precludes you from doing that.
Yeah, I think the key, and Paula, correct me if I'm wrong, the goal
Yeah.
of the program really was to create or, build onto or improve existing spaces. So I think in a case like that, I think, one of the things that, Brian, you may want to take a look at is whether or not the project really would expand services or provide new services, or whether the project would be potentially more maintenance related. So I think it depends on how, again, you really put framework or frame that project scope. But as Paula said, yeah, I think it needs to be part of a cohesive method, and really a cohesive project where all aspects relate to each other. So
That's helpful, Greg. And, when I just think through like, how I might have envisioned an application, I'm not sure upgrading restrooms in all of the parks within a municipality would have risen to the top. So, just thinking that through, figure out what makes sense from your local perspective. And if that's really the project that rises to the top, just work on how you can create that narrative.
The next question is, will you send out a copy of today's PowerPoint?
That'll be a yes.
Yes, I feel like that might be our easiest question today.
Yay.
The next one is, could this grant be used for a single component of a larger project? For example, this community is renovating a public building, and a portion of that building will be dedicated to public use, ergo conference rooms. Could this grant be used towards the public space elements of the project?
So real quick, Paula, I want to jump in on that.
Please.
One of the things that you have to be careful of as it relates to this type of project is CDBG really is not to be utilized for projects in buildings that are for kind of the general purpose of local government, right? So city offices, if the project is located within the city office, but the building is generally to complete governmental activities, that I don't know that would be an appropriate use of CDBG. We're not able to work on those types of facilities. However, if this is a different type of public building, again, this is as HUD views this, we're meeting the low to moderate income standard on an area-wide benefit. And that's why we have the customer list that we do, which means that all of these projects, the benefit has to be realized by the public at large. So conference rooms, I think you would really, in things of that nature, I think you would really have to make the case as to how the general public at large, and specifically those low to moderate income individuals in the community, would benefit from those improvements.
Yeah, I
don't know, Paula,
appreciate.
if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, no, Greg, thanks, because that's good context. I think the other element of that question is sort of like, if it's a larger site, but maybe it's a phased approach, or only one element might really be that community space. I just want to sort of reiterate, like any project that's submitted for this funding, like has to be a standalone project on its own, and sort of still has to demonstrate how it increases the usability, accessibility, and seasonality within a public space. So, just framing that question that way might help you to think whether or not that makes sense, at least in my perspective.
Great. So the next question is regarding universal design. It says, if a structure is designed using universal design standards, Do we need to go through the additional expense of having an agency such as Disability Advocates of Kent County review it? This can be quite costly at this point of the process. We were specifically thinking about applying for a farmer's market.
That's interesting to me. So we really forged a relationship with the disability advocacy groups throughout Michigan. And I was not under the impression that they would be charging for that, but I can certainly drill that down. I believe that will get you the most points. You can still get points, but you would not get the entire, I think it's 30 points for universal design. So that, that's got to be a judgment call, but I'll clarify that and put that in the frequently asked questions about the charges.
And the next question is also about accessibility. Would projects such as improving accessibility to an existing city property be considered? Example, making fully ADA compliant and improving general access to a present municipally owned property.
Municipally owned property, I don't know if that's like a city hall or if that's an accessible park. Anything that would incorporate, and just ADA is really the minimum standard here, I think, that we'd be looking for. And then, having something universally designed is really what we're looking for, which goes above and beyond ADA. I think that could be eligible depending on the public building or space that you're referring to. But then again, it's just a matter of beyond ADA. And then it also has to think through how does this increase the seasonality and accessibility? Like all of those other things have to come to play too, not just the accessibility. Hopefully that's helpful. Sue DeVries, thank you, Sue DeVries.
The next question is, in regards to shovel ready, is an applicant penalized or ineligible if the project is already bid and scheduled?
I'm sorry, Amy, can you repeat that? And then Greg, I may actually lob to you if you're game. Will you just repeat that one more time?
Sure. Essentially, the question is, would the community be ineligible if the project is already bid?
Okay, Paul. So if a project is that far along, I mean, the goal of the program is really to provide resources for projects that are in need of funding. So if a project is so far along that, really it's been bid, you could ask the question on whether funding is necessary at that point. However, that being said, the biggest thing as it relates to the CDBG funding is all of our compliance needs to take place. So to the extent that, lining up the project with the timing for the CDBG project, and Paula has included the draft of the proposed timeline for these projects. If that timeline, there is going to be a significant delay, I would imagine. So if you're going to apply for CDBG funds, you would have to have the public notices, the resolution, and then go through the rest of those steps, including completing the environmental review, which is the NEPA, that Environmental Protection Agency review, not the phase 1 or phase 2. That has to be completed. And then, we'll be taking these projects to the MSF board for approval in September. So there are, if you are at the point that you are looking to bid a project currently, you've completed the engineering, etc. I mean, you could be ahead of the game. However, you should take into consideration whether or not the remainder of that timing works for you, because there would really be no work that could be completed until we're into a grant agreement. And that would be, sometime, late fall, early 2024 as it relates to these projects, with really work taking place over the summer of 24. So it's more of a timing, no contracts can be entered into. You can't incur any costs until, the environmental review is complete and a grant agreement is executed. So I think as it relates to how this will affect your project and whether it's worth waiting, you'll have to decide, kind of that for yourself. But all of the CDBG steps and normal MSF approval steps will have to be completed prior to moving the project forward. So I think it's more of a timing issue from your standpoint. And again, taking into consideration, if you apply, it's not, there is no guarantee that you would essentially be awarded funds. So you'll have to make that decision on whether a delay in the project would be worth it at that point.
Thanks, Greg.
The next question is, would a dedicated pickleball court in an already existing playground park setting qualify, along with a total redo of the park that is 30+ years old? So I think first, like, is the pickleball court, an eligible activity in addition to renovating the park?
Isn't pickleball like the fastest growing sport in Michigan or something like
Pretty-
that?
I believe my stepfather and his friend's answer would be yes, it would qualify. And
It's a
I
big
would agree
deal,
with that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't. And we've, certainly looked at other park improvements in addition, so that could be part of an application, as long as you're talking about how it expands the seasonality, the accessibility of that public space. I don't see why it wouldn't qualify.
Yeah. It essentially, we don't have to create the space. We can expand, those recreation
Right.
type opportunities of those existing spaces as well. So.
And just a plug for pickleball, we've been doing a lot of pickleball courts through the Public Spaces Community Places program too, which is admittedly a lot lower threshold in terms of grant amount. We do 50,000 if the community is able to raise 50,000. So keep that in mind if anyone has a pickleball or other public space project that's a little smaller.
Thanks, guys. The next question is property owned by the DDA, so a downtown development authority, considered to be owned by the municipality?
I will gladly ask Greg if he disagrees, but it would be my understanding that the DDA probably shares an EIN number with the municipality, right? And I mean, the DDA is a function of the city. So Greg, have you had this come up where that was a question?
I think you hit the most important part is how is the DDA structured? Is it actually an arm of the local government and structured as such, or is it a standalone entity that's providing services to the municipality? So I think in that instance, again, like you said, Paula, if it is truly an arm of the local government, we would consider, that property owned by the municipality.
And so if we need to drill that down, if it's structured differently, that might be a follow-up conversation.
I would think so. I think that's something they could submit in the FAQ with a little more specificity, and we could have a conversation about, certainly.
Yeah, thanks, Amy.
Yeah. The next question is, are public restrooms in the downtown area eligible under this grant?
Yeah, I don't see why they wouldn't be. It would be on a UGLUG owned site, presumably, right? As long as it's an UGLUG owned site and there is a compelling, Greg, I'll just, defer to you a little bit. I think what does that increase the seasonality of that area, of that public gathering space? Does that provide accessibility in terms of universal design? And then can you say like that's benefiting the entire population of the UGLUG if it's a downtown district bathroom? These are just things that pop up in my head, but I don't know, Greg, if you have any other thoughts.
Sure. No, I think, as a part of the activity, a restroom in the downtown that is open to all residents certainly benefits everyone in the community. So that would meet that area-wide benefit standard for HUD. I think, the challenge is in, as Paula said, relating that to how does it, making a case if that is the sole element of the project, how does that meet all those other standards relating to increasing seasonality? And it may, and it would just be up to you as the applicant to identify how the project then meets the other requirements so that it scores well based against other, when compared to other projects that may be submitted.
But my guess is, look, I mean, that would be one heck of a bathroom, right? If the minimum grant ask is 750, right? So maybe there are other elements that
Sure.
would be included as part of that, and that would just be one element of it. So,
Again, with the, right, as the
Yeah.
minimum, grant amount has increased, that certainly, again, considering that there's a 10% match, right? So that's a very expensive standalone facility. So I'm guessing that there are probably other aspects of the project and that you would be able to form that business case around.
that's my kind of public bathroom right there.
Me too, Paula. So the next application is regarding green infrastructure. The application states that the green infrastructure opinion must be provided by an engineer, so a PE. Would a letter from a licensed landscape architect meet this requirement? Grants for non-point source pollution projects, and they put in parentheses, green infrastructure through Eagle, allow a licensed landscape architect to stamp and sign site plans for green infrastructure projects. So I think
You
really
know,
the crux of that is, are they allowed to have a licensed landscape architect sign that
Yeah,
document?
you know what? That's something I will drill down a little bit. I think we had really felt like a PE was the way to go, but I'll let me get with the powers that be and we'll see what we can come up with. I'll put that among things to discover, to dig into for the frequently asked questions. Good question.
And the next question is, can outside grant awards be used as part of the UGLUG match? Or must it be a minimum 10% UGLUG cash plus additional grant funding?
Greg, how do you typically answer that question?
So outside grant awards cannot be used part of the UGLUG match. So the UGLUG has to have a minimum of 10% of its own funding in the grant. And then if you're able to leverage any additional outside funds, that's great. But there has to be a minimum of that 10% cash match coming from the municipality itself.
Outside of that additional.
Outside of, yeah. And
Yeah.
that's 10% of the total project cost.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate that.
And sort of in tandem with that, can engineering costs be included in the overall cost of the project?
Greg, I feel like this one had come up before. Can you take a stab at that one?
Yeah, engineering can be considered as part of the overall project costs and should be, because they're going to be a part of the budget.
Thank you.
This one, the next one just also happens to clarify a little bit about the 10% match. So it says, does the UGLUG have to commit the entire 10%? So I feel like we've addressed that. The answer is yes. Or can a private donor or other support count towards the 10% match?
Again, the UGLUG, the municipality does need to provide that 10% cash match. So and I know that Paula gives some examples in the application materials itself, but so an example would be if it's $1 million project, they would be responsible for providing $100,000 in match from the municipality itself for the project.
Great.
And so at the time of application, that money needs to be in the general fund or some other fund within the UGLUG in order to qualify for local minimum match, right? Greg, is that the right
Correct.
way
Yep,
to
and
describe
I
it?
think
Okay.
they identify where the funding is going to be from in the resolution, right? So it's 100,000 from your Parks and Rec or water, depending on what the project revolves around. I do think it's important to, again, just to reiterate the fact that any additional outside sources of funding, so outside of the 10% that is brought to the table, needs to be available at the time of application as well. So it isn't, the application may not be considered if you identify that you're seeking 80% of the project from CDBG, 10% public match from the municipality, and then you're going to fundraise or seek other sources. If those other sources are not identified and available at the time of the application would not be considered.
And we did get, that was a little hard our first round, wasn't it, Greg? Like where we had a couple of additional sources, like state or federal sources that were coming about after the
Sure.
fact. And so we sort of had a little bit of juxtapositioning to try to figure out like who's covering what and what was included in which application. So, do we have words of wisdom? Like, first of all, the anything included in the application needs to be committed, right? I mean, that's fair to say, so that we can quickly get off the ground and running. And then the other thing that got a little squirrely at one point was we had an outside source of funding that was, those were state dollars. They would have not required Davis-Bacon wages, but because the HUD dollars were being contributed, Davis-Bacon wages then were required for the entire project, including the state funded other part of the project, which blew people's minds. And I get that. But so that's something just to be
Right.
aware of if you're looking at different sources of funding that may not require Davis-Bacon wages. And I don't know, Greg, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I think that you hit it. Really, what we will consider as a part of the app for the application process as it relates to the submissions are projects that you frame. So they need to, as Paula said, the projects that you submit for this funding round need to be standalone. If you have projects, like if there's a municipality that is applying for additional funding from another source, and maybe there's additional activities that may happen at the same park, our project needs to be able to be completed on its own. So, the funding needs to be secured for the project that you apply for us. The activities need to be completed outside of any other project, unless you're going to, as Paula said, incorporate those other aspects into the project scope. So I think, that's really the biggest thing, is that, you as the applicant have the ability to put framework and put rails around the application that you're going to submit. And in doing so, it's just, you need to be cognizant of the fact that the project needs to be standalone, that the sources of funding need to be approved and secure at the time that you apply for however you frame our project. Again, the property needs to be municipally owned, etc. That however you frame the project, and you have the ability to frame it, however you would like. But that project needs to meet independently all of the criteria that's set out in the instructions and other application materials.
Yeah, that's just helpful to talk through, because I think that did cause us a little confusion.
Sure.
Thanks, Greg.
So the next question is sort of regarding future potential public gathering space grant opportunities. So the question is, will there be another round of public gathering grants coming next year? We have heard that this may be the last opportunity, as focus is now being transitioned to affordable housing.
Yeah, so this competitive funding round using CDBG dollars as we know it, this will be the last year essentially, because as you know, per executive order, the CDBG funding will now be transferred to MISHDA to address housing programming. So I don't know that there will be any ability to replace those dollars with any state dollars that might allow us to keep this going. But, certainly these public placemaking projects are a huge priority at the MEDC. And so I wouldn't count us out just yet, but I think this program, as you see it and feel it today, will look much different if it's, continuing in some way, shape, or form. It has been our intention to continue this as an annual funding allocation.
A question now about eligibility: is a walking biking trail extension eligible as long as it is in a downtown or adjacent to a downtown?
Fair question. I don't know, Greg, if you have any initial thoughts on that. I don't know that it would be ineligible. Go ahead.
I would agree. I don't know that it would be necessarily ineligible, but in and of itself, you would have to really put a lot of work, I think, into identifying how the walking trail is in and of itself a public gathering space and not, transit or some, I think you could do that, but again, keeping in mind, it would be increasing the seasonality access. So there are probably a lot of information that you could supply related to that. But I think if the activities solely revolve around a trail extension, you should also probably include why that extension may be not fit to be funded by other sources that typically that fund trails such as DNR, etc.
And public spaces, community places, which we
Sure.
have funded some that have connected to downtowns in the past. So just FYI, I did include that link back in there.
The next question is, if the city does more than a 10% match, are additional points awarded?
Yep. No, I'm sorry. It's really more in terms of resource leveraging. So if you leverage other additional outside resources, you will gain 10%. But we don't necessarily reward or penalize more than 10%. Sorry,
Okay.
I misunderstood the question for a minute.
And if anyone is following the question and answers versus the chat, Sue DeVries, our colleague, actually put a couple of links in there specific to MEDC Universal Design Guidelines. So I'm going to just let those be maintained in there for now. And certainly, of course, as we've said, continue to issue us questions in those weekly FAQs, and we will get back to folks on that. Okay. So I think that addressed all the questions in the Q&A. I am going to move on to the chat just for a minute to see if there are any outstanding things that I don't feel like got addressed. I feel like this one's specific, so I'll read it. But can a municipality apply for the funds and also the DNR trust fund money to see what grant funding is approved? So could you apply for both grants and just see which one you got?
Amy or Greg, I feel like you guys have the most experience with how that panned out during our first round. And I, for one, thought it was incredibly difficult, even though I was very much on the exterior of that. If the timing is such that they are both being applied for at the same time, what is your recommendation?
Yeah, I think, if the question is, what grant funding is approved for the same project, then by, all accounts, if you'd like to apply, if you have a project and want to apply for multiple sources, I think that, that's up to you. It seems to make sense if you, to try to, increase the odds of being awarded funding. Again, as Paula said, I think there were instances last year where we saw within maybe an existing park, different activities that were happening and people applying for different funding. One of the things, there are unintended consequences. So as I said earlier, our project, we're going to view whatever you submit to us as a standalone. So we want to see specifically only what you were applying for CDBG funding as it relates to this round. So the fact that you may be applying for funds for another project, we really only will be considering for scoring purposes activities that are going to be completed by our project, with the understanding that our project is not contingent on any other funding, as all of the funding needs to be approved and secured at the time of application. That being said, if you were to apply for, DNR or other funding for other activities, there's like the trail was just brought up. There's a trail that runs adjacent to the property that you're looking to improve with CDBG funds. Depending on how that would potentially in the long run work together, you may, as Paula mentioned earlier, unintentionally be applying, the federal compliance standards in prevailing wage, et cetera, on other aspects of the project that maybe you had not budgeted for. So again, what we would like to see is our project as a standalone, and that's really what we want in the application materials, is what is the CDBG project? And again, if you are applying for other sources, keep in mind that we expect to accomplish our project activities on site. by, over the next couple construction seasons. I believe it's by the end of 2025, was it, Paula? That
Correct.
all of the activities have to be completed. Really what that means is that if we're working on the park or in a certain area, really no other work can happen in that area at that time as well. If it does, there's the likelihood that that work takes on, again, those other federal characteristics, the compliance requirements, et cetera. So, there's nothing that says you can't apply for other. However, depending on what you're applying for, there may be some unintended consequences for that other project.
But if they're the exact same project and you're just trying to,
Oh, sure.
put applications out there for the best to maximize, there's no reason why you couldn't do that. It just gets a little more complicated if you're looking at both funding sources for
Yeah.
different aspects of one project, right? Is
Yeah.
that fair to say?
I think so, because again,
Okay.
what we want to make sure that all of the sources of funding for our project are approved and secured at the time of application, which, other, the DNR trust fund, et cetera, that you would be applying for would not be. But again, we want you really to, apply for every, we want the project to be holistic, right? All the aspects of the project. So it does, it is somewhat problematic if there are multiple sources going into the same project and they're not secure.
And then Amy, I feel like we've got about 4 minutes left. So I don't know how quickly we can, sort of parse through any, questions that might be, sort of newer, in terms of topics. But
Sure.
keep in mind that we will parse through the Q&A as well as the chat. We will compile all those questions and answers, and those will come back out to you. So if there's anything we did miss or you're not able to see one screen or the other, we will follow up. But Amy, what do you see in there that we need?
Yeah, the next one that I see is about certified grant administrators. So it says, are CDBG certified grant administrators still required? And if so, do we include their fee in the grant request?
So the certified administrators, grant administrators, the CGAs are going to be required for all of these projects. But their fee will be on top of the project activities, as well as CDBG reimburses for the cost of the environmental review. There are some costs that the program will fund on top of the actual project related activities. Amy, I was looking through some of the other questions just for a timing aspect. One of them was, can engineering design be started upon award of the grant, even if letters have not been signed and executed? So prior to engineering, and engineering for us is considered a pre-award cost. So what needs to happen before you can enter into that engineering contract, there is some, some exempt environmental review paperwork that has to be completed. The municipality has to request the ability to incur that engineering cost, and then you need to get approval from us prior to. So based on the timeline that Paula provided, I imagine that, the awards and everything, all of that could be completed, and you could, ask to incur those costs somewhere around midsummer-ish. Is that, I think from the timeline that Paula provided, that would fit that.
Yeah. And then this might be our last one based on timing. I see one. Will CDBG consider funding for parking lots as an eligible element of an overall project?
I'll say, I think as long as that is part of the overall, plan to improve or create new public gathering space, that could be an eligible expense.
I would agree with that, Paula.
And
All
then
right, Amy.
yeah, this might be our last one. Committed funding. Can a letter of commitment fund the funder, like a private donor or groups? Will that satisfy the condition of the application? So I think that they're just asking, like, if they have specific letters from additional leveraged sources, will that be sufficient to have like a letter of commitment in the application document?
And my answer would be yes, if it's considered leveraging additional resources. But I think, unless that's the question of, could this satisfy the local match? And I think in that case, it's no, right? Because we would be asking the UGLOG to provide the cash, not from an outside source. But if it's leveraging additional sources, that's a yes. But I don't know if I'm getting at the question. And I don't know, Greg, if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, I think you did. I think that, yeah, we would consider a letter of commitment from, those outside sources. Again, the municipality itself within that authorizing resolution will identify the amount of match that it is committing and, the funding source of that match on the municipal side. But for any private side funding come into the project, I think, a letter identifying that initially would work. If we go through the review process and we can't substantiate that, that may invalidate your application and jeopardize the funding, and we may move to another project if that's the case. So if you have a letter that is showing that you have secured funding, please make sure that it is.
Well, and let me just say thank you to all of you for hanging in there and muscling through some of these questions with us. I know it's a little tedious at time when we're trying to manage all of this, but we will follow up, as I had mentioned, with an email with the frequently asked questions, as well as the webinar recording. And so once you get that, and if there's something that we have not answered or that you need to drill down a little bit more, please reach out to that Public Gathering Spaces email, and we'll be happy to get you an answer as soon as we can. We will be posting those answers weekly. So Amy and Greg, the rest of the MEDC team, thank you. And for all of you for just taking your time out of your busy day today. Really glad to see you all today. So thanks everyone, and best of luck on your applications.
Thank you.
Thank you.